The theater world was rocked months ago when the coronavirus pandemic suspended all live events indefinitely. But for Baldwin Wallace University, the show must go on. Hi, I'm Sarah McCord, a student at Baldwin Wallace, and I'm here to take you behind the scenes of the virtual production of Spring Awakening. And trust me, this isn't your typical Zoom performance. We're going to talk with members of the cast and creative team to learn all about what it took to put together this virtual production. So welcome to the making of Awakening. Today I'm talking with recent alumnae Libby Tofig, who served as the dramaturg for this show. Researching the world of the show is crucial, and Libby found a lot of cool facts. Keep listening to learn more about researching, collaborating, and creating the world for the virtual production of Spring Awakening. When did you join the project?
Actually, literally like the week before your guys' school started, so like very quickly, which made for like a very interesting process, because usually like my research, especially for things that are so historically specific, takes a while. So it was very like condensed into like a very short period of time, because we wanted to make sure that we could get it ready for people to get started and get working right away.
Where did you begin your research?
So I started with Frank Wiedekind's Spring Awakening, which I'd read before but hadn't read for a little while. So that Spring Awakening was actually based on a late 19th century expressionist play, or very turn of the century. I believe it came out, again, haven't looked at this in a minute, in 1891. But yeah, Frank Wiedekind was really kind of one of the major players in that movement, sort of the father of irreverence, if you will, in European theater, European expressionist theater, especially German, Austrian expressionist theater, because it's interesting because like right before the Nazi ascension to power, from the period of, I would say, like fin de siècle, so like the decade of the 1890s through like the 1920s, there was this quite liberal and progressive environment in Germany. So it lent itself to a lot of like very experimental and fascinating artwork and theater and political policy. It was a very transformative time period.
What was your dramaturgy process for this show?
Well, this specific process really was front-loaded at the beginning. Especially for things that are so historically specific. I would say actually next to another piece that I did with the Goodman, which was about 19th century fin de siècle, but this was Paris, Sarah Bernhardt. This was the most difficult dramaturgy I've ever done because it's so specific. And especially if we're, talking about things like abortion policy, and techniques, like that was something that was really difficult for me because people obviously weren't recording it out of fear of being prosecuted. And it was all very covert. So it was really difficult for me to come across that information. Also, really valuable historical information was oftentimes in German. So that's true. That presented a little, like a very interesting impasse for me. But yeah, so at the beginning, because it's so imperative to like have an understanding of the culture to build that world, especially in a show that's so based on like cultural like taboos and restrictions and youth culture. Like you can't really build from that unless you have a real understanding of that. And so it was definitely mostly at the beginning. It was just making sure that people, especially since I couldn't be present in the room, had the ability to reflect on something and get a sense of the environment before building a character.
How was the collaboration process different from shows you've worked on in the past?
No. I put together a packet primarily, and then I've been emailing back and forth with Vicky. And the good thing is that Vicky and I have worked together for quite some time, so I kind of know what she looks for in the packet. Again, this was a totally new experience for me. It was pretty difficult understanding that, like, trying to figure out the best way to express this. I think that there's a point to which it's possible to oversaturate people with content and historical information, especially past the point that, like, the characters in the environment would know. So you have to be very choosy about the kind of things you include. Also because my goal is to support the director's narrative, but not interject my personal opinions or biases into the research that I'm compiling. So I knew the basics of what Vicky wanted and sort of what she wanted to express. Again, it was sort of difficult that we weren't able to sort of meet as frequently in person because obviously, at least for me, that's how I feel most comfortable collaborating. But yeah, I think especially in this sort of like expedited process, it was a little tricky to make sure, like, if we were going to give a crash course in fin de siècle German culture, like what was going to be the things that was most important. So I had to be very much on the same page with Vicky of like what things she already knew. So like, did I need to do a pronunciation guide, or did she already have the facilities and the understanding to help people, which she did. So I focused more again on like cultural things. So it was sort of like some very basic conversations, and then some touching up throughout.
Did the new virtual format influence any of the research that you did?
I came across a very fascinating thing, which unfortunately there is literally like, it exists in like this film exists in like the archives of like an Austrian or a German library, and has been debuted at some film festivals. But in the 1920s, during the Weimar Republic, Weimar area, it was interesting because I did dramaturgy for Cabaret as well. So again, this is all sort of full circle. They did a digital production of it. They did a film, which is very fascinating, a film of the play, especially because not even 20 years prior, people weren't even allowed to perform it. It was harshly censored. So that was really interesting. I wasn't able to get any sort of digital footage, which was such a bummer. I really sort of jumped down that rabbit hole for quite a bit. But we got some like really interesting pictures. But I think that like that was a really interesting part of my dramaturgy that perhaps I wouldn't have been, compelled to look up before. Because obviously, like, when you are compiling, it's a little bit different, because when you're putting together a stage production, you have to be very like careful as far as like archived footage or like reflecting in other people's performances, because you don't want actors to sort of internalize that. But to hear that, like, right now we're in this like very I think transformative moment in sort of like accessibility in theater and like theatrical expression through film, and like and people are sort of experimenting, like, okay, if we're filming productions, like, do we actually engage? This is no longer like archival footage. So I think like do research on those film versions was fascinating, because I think it also offered us, a little bit of insight into like how faithful like should you be to like the theatrical convention versus like into like making it like a cinematic experience.
Yeah.
But working virtually, understanding that I couldn't be there to like personally explain things, because usually I put together a packet and then I will like talk a little bit with people, and then I feel it's less like I'm more of a face to people in the process. So people can ask me questions personally and know that like I'm a human being behind like a bunch of words.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, like I really was just communicating through the articles I wrote myself and the articles that I edited, down to sort of like streamlined for people. So that was like a really interesting experience. And I think that, I don't know, I think there'd be things that I would do differently. Yeah. And I feel like the basics of dramaturgy are the same for film theater and I guess we'll call it like live, like presentational theater.
Yeah.
But I also think it allows you to account for some other dynamics that perhaps you wouldn't think about before. So the question is really like, are we intending to film a production with what the confines that we have, or are we using this impasse to sort of explore artistically with the cinematic form? And if we do that, how, like, is there dramaturgy that I can do to sort of help project an environment when you don't have it in front of you? I don't know if this will be a little existential, but I don't know if after COVID, like, culturally we will ever be the same, because like I don't think that we've ever really considered pandemics, so like mass pandemics, as something that is as like a really plausible and something that could really deeply affect our work. But then I think it's challenging people and like, you know, sort of entrepreneurs and young innovative minds to think about ways that we can, you know, produce theater outside of the confines of you know, large gatherings of people, live stages, and redefine the genre, because I feel like there's always been theater and film. So yes, like I think that this could actually be like a really exciting moment for accessibility in theater if we allow it to be.